Hey, you guys. Welcome to Addictive Personalities. My name is Bethany, and this podcast is based on lived experience, not professional advice. We're talking all things addiction, mental health, trauma, and healing, and everything in between. Please be mindful of where you are in your own journey, as some content may be triggering. This is a safe space without judgment, a space where raw honesty is celebrated. So if you're here, let's get after it. Hey guys, welcome back. So today we're talking about triggers. And I feel like this word gets thrown around constantly. I see it on TV, I hear it from people, but nobody really stops to ask or even try to understand or comprehend what does it actually mean. Because at this point, and I quote, "I was triggered," has kind of become a catch-all phrase for bad behavior. I think it's overused, and honestly, sometimes it's used as an excuse. And I don't appreciate that, because a real trigger has to do with trauma and addiction, and abuse is often a traumatic experience. So any type of abuse, emotional, sexual, financial, verbal, physical abuse, that is a traumatic experience. And so when someone is triggered, it is not because they got angry, okay? So I would really ask, if this is you that uses that word a lot without really understanding the gravity behind it, to think, like, am I using this word correctly? Because a trigger is actually a symptom of a much deeper problem. It is not meant to be used as an excuse for not being able to control yourself. So what is a trigger? As it relates to addiction, most people will tell you it's the people, places, and things. And yeah, to a certain extent, that is true. So the advice becomes, remove yourself from those people, those places, those situations. Simple, right? No brainer, right? We all should just pick ourselves up and move ourselves to a different location. Wrong. So wrong. Let's think about this. Let's break it down. So what if the trigger is a member of your family that you live with? What if it's someone you just can't cut off? What if all you know is a group of people and all you can afford is the place you're at? I had the luxury of moving myself from California to Chicago 4 times to change my environment. Did that stop me from using meth? Yeah, it did. But it didn't stop me from addiction swapping. So I can't really, that was a long time ago. I can't really speak on what triggered me necessarily. I don't think I was necessarily triggered. I just was always under the influence. We're talking about Chicago, right? Bars are open forever. Cocaine is everywhere. But that's an external trigger. What if it's a text, right? Or a memory or a smell? And what if it's your baby daddy? Right? What if it's your baby mama? You have a relationship with that person for life. And so I'll share a little story. Still to this day, my daughter's dad triggers me. So I've had to learn how to regulate myself in order to not make myself suffer in his presence. So let's just think about that for a second. And then I want you to kind of step outside of that. And I want you to take just a moment and think about, what if the trigger is you, your thoughts, your emotions, your patterns, your mental health? You can't exactly remove you from yourself. In fact, you don't even have the word yourself without you. So here's what I actually think a trigger is. A trigger is residual, unresolved emotion or trauma, and it's something that's still sitting in you that hasn't been processed. And I think that living a life dodging triggers left and right is actually not living. So I want this episode to be around gaining control over yourself, your behavior, your reactions, your input and your output. Like I said, most of the time it's tied to trauma, and trauma is scary to face and to work through. And I don't just mean one big dramatic event. I mean the whole experience, because let's be real about addiction. The addiction itself is traumatic. Especially if you are in environment where everyone's using, then the risk goes up and the exposure to traumatic experiences goes way up. It doesn't just disappear. The chaos, the desperation, the things you did, the things that happened to you, it doesn't just go away when you get clean. Those things are still there. So I can imagine that there are many of you who battle that every day. And there are many people who battle that every day, whether they were using drugs or not, because let's also point out the fact that people are traumatized outside of a drug addiction, in abusive relationships, sexual assaults. It doesn't mean that only people who are recovering from addiction experience triggers. And it'll show up. If you don't resolve these, especially when we're talking about abuse, if you don't resolve these in yourself and take your power back, they will show up and ruin relationships. So again, a lot of the theme in my podcast is about accountability, self-awareness, and I think that this falls squarely in that vein. So triggers feel really intense. That's why you dream about the things, you smell familiar smells and it brings you back, get hit with flashbacks or random images that make no sense. Or in my case, I get triggered. I don't get triggered to use, but I get triggered to feel and remember traumatic experiences. Things like rape, things like dangerous situations, me running out of buildings, me getting choked, me hitting men, a lot of things. And it doesn't make me want to use. It does make me aware that I have these things. And sometimes I don't have the time to really unpack these things, which I don't really know if I need to. But I do recommend that if you're having a hard time and you're triggered often, I think that is important to do a deep dive and maybe work with a professional. These triggers aren't random. They can be, but it's your brain telling you, hey, we never dealt with this. Don't forget. And our brains and our emotions, if we don't work through these external and internal triggers, it won't let you forget. You can stuff them down with drug or substance use. They're still there. You can take medication. That is not a cure-all, right? It helps you manage the symptoms of deeper trauma. So let's talk about the types of triggers. You've got external triggers and internal triggers. The external ones are easier to spot. It's easier to remove yourself from an external world. For instance, I don't like to go to stores anymore. I get anxiety really bad and I don't like people that I don't know. And, it doesn't take me long to like someone if I start talking to them, but if I don't know them and they're just people around me, I get really overwhelmed and overstimulated and I can't handle it. Now, do I still have to go to stores sometimes? Yes, but I would prefer not to. So usually I will do a pickup order or a delivery order, which at this point, I'm still unemployed. So that just tells you how much I invest in not having to go out in public where there are a lot of people. And here in Utah, Sundays are the best days to do things because most people here in Utah are in church. So that is one way I have removed myself from external triggers. Not that I can afford it much longer, but it's the person who calls you and suddenly your whole mood shifts, or you run into them and they really hurt you. This happened to me. In another episode, I'll go into more detail about some of the traumatic experiences I've had, but I believe I saw this person who did very bad things to me and I just froze up. Your whole body has a reaction, right? So those are easy to spot, easy to recognize, easier to avoid because you're fine and you feel at peace. And then boom, out of nowhere, one interaction and you're filled with rage, anxiety, whatever it is, paralyzed with fear. And those are obvious. And typically you can list them out. But the real work is with internal triggers because those don't come from outside of you and you have to sit with yourself. That's part of recovery. That's part of healing. And that really is the move from having to distract yourself from yourself and really being able to sit with yourself alone and love yourself. And that is still a journey and a process for me. And it's not easy. It's taken me, I would say, 3 years where I've been doing active work. And again, my clean date is July 3rd of 2018. So we're approaching the 8-year mark. So when I say I've been 8 years clean, it doesn't mean that I've been 8 years healed. Like literally, it doesn't just stop. And in the beginning, it's going to be really just about figuring out what your new existence is. It's highly uncomfortable. Or, you distract yourself with busy work, right? But those triggers will then start to appear. And for me, I'll be honest, a big one is body image, body dysmorphia in particular. And I've struggled with this my entire life. And I think that this may have been something that kept me using. In fact, I know it was, because when you use meth, of course, you get skinnier and it's quick. It is a quick indicator. And it's still something I deal with. I don't look at my body and say, oh, I'm going to go do some meth and slim down. Like, I know that the work for me requires exercise. And so if I choose not to exercise, that's on me. Like, one thing, when people come off of meth, they gain weight. So it can be really hard for someone who has body dysmorphia, because that's all we focus on. But then there's also racing anxiety. There's overstimulation, intrusive thoughts. That stuff doesn't require a person or a place. It just shows up, and it's part of the mental health issues that we have to deal with. And it all stems from unresolved trauma, whether it was in your childhood, whether it was in your formative teenage years, whether it was in your 20s, whether it was just recently, or whether you're still in it, or whether it was your addiction and the people that you surrounded yourself with. And while it sounds easy to, they say in the program, it's your people, places, and things. Well, we don't have the luxury to just remove ourselves from those people. And some of those people are the only people that we've known. In fact, I know someone whom I love dearly who is clean and has been clean way longer than me. And I don't think that she's triggered to use, but in fact, I know she isn't, but she still surrounds herself with people who do use. And so I think there's even an addiction to, or a belief that that's the level of people that you hang around. Like, you believe that that's your worth, and you identify with those people, right? Like, you can't imagine yourself being in a corporate boardroom among C-level executives, because that doesn't fit the narrative in your head. So you hang out with people who are low and struggling. That's familiar. So you can't just pluck someone out of environment that has been created over time and conditioned you over time, and then expect them to be able to operate. It would be similar to being a felon who has served a lot of time in prison. This is why there's such a rate of reentry into the prison institution. It's because when you're in prison, you become adapted to that environment. So living in the quote unquote real world is a huge challenge. So with all that said, this is where I'm going to say something that people may not like. Just because something triggers you does not mean you get to act however you want. And I think we've kind of lost that. There's a lot of validating going on in the mental health community, and like, all of your feelings are valid and affirming. Listen, feelings you can't control. Emotions you can. And you can 100% control your reactions. You can't blame external factors forever. And you can't even sit there and victimize yourself because of your own internal triggers. A trigger is a warning, is a sign that you need help, that you're not healed. Okay, so the word trigger, again, gets thrown around like it's on sale. We see it everywhere. And the trigger excuses the audacity to overreact and be a psychopath or act like one. Like, I was triggered, so I did this. No, you were triggered and then you made a choice. So triggers explain behavior, but they don't excuse it. And I'm not saying triggers aren't real. They're 100% real, and I empathize. I have learned through discipline and redirecting and acknowledging the way that my body reacts to certain things. And then my initial reactions, I'm going to tell you right now, usually if your body is hot and if you start to get activated, it's probably best you take a beat, evaluate yourself. Unless, of course, there is an acceptance of that behavior and you're okay with that. And sometimes there may be a means to an end in that case. Might be some kind of game. I can't speak for anybody else, but all I know is that I no longer want to be a victim of my own triggers. I no longer want to be a victim of someone else. I no longer want to be a victim of my trauma. I want to take that trauma and I want to own it and I want to make it my bitch in a sense. So triggers are real, but they are information. They're showing you where something is still unresolved. And so what do you do with that? You don't just spend your life avoiding everything because that's not realistic and it sounds like a living hell. You can't avoid your own mind. You can't avoid every situation. You can't control everything around you. But what you can do is build awareness. This is the pinnacle of living life the way you want and in a way where you are making an impact and not hurting people and not hurting yourself. It's how you fit in a situation, how you affect energy around you, what your intention is, how you move, and recognize the patterns. Pay attention to your reactions because self-awareness is everything. And that's where it starts. And yeah, changing your reaction can happen in a split second, but building the mindset to do that, that takes work. It's not easy. I'm still doing it to this day. I think I'll be doing it for the rest of my life. You have to recognize that you are the orchestrator of your own life and your own mindset, and you have to want to heal. And for a lot of us, it looks a lot different to heal. So I'm not telling you you should or shouldn't do that. In fact, I try to remove that word should out of my vocabulary. But I know this might sound too simple, but I genuinely believe this. Triggers are fixable, not overnight, not magically, but over time, they lose their power. You can make them lose their power because the goal isn't to avoid triggers forever. I mean, like literally, sometimes we don't even know what triggers us until we're triggered. Sometimes there are repressed memories that we will be triggered to remember. And when that happens, guess what? That's when the work begins because we don't want to be sabotaging relationships, making things difficult on ourselves, being curled up in a ball on the floor. We want to rewire the way we receive information. And a lot of that can be helped with cognitive behavioral therapy. And there's also EMDR, which uses eye movements. But the goal is to understand the trigger so that it stops controlling your behavior. Because at the end of the day, it's not about never being triggered again. It's about getting to a place where something hits you and it doesn't dictate what you do next. All right. Well, I hope that this made you think a little bit more about yourself and maybe empowers you to take action against the things that we fall victim to or enslaved by. I don't want to invalidate necessarily the fact that people are triggered, and when they're triggered, they want to use. And I commend people who, at least when they're triggered, call a sponsor or go to a meeting. But there may not be a meeting that you can go to. So what are you going to do then, right? Like you have to rise up. And a lot of this is going to come when you start to recognize the things about yourself that are amazing. Okay. I didn't start this episode with an affirmation, so I'll end it with an affirmation. You are badass. So I would say the affirmation is, I am a badass. The things that we've gone through, the things we've overcome make us badasses. So what's a little trigger work? It's time to grow and learn more about ourselves and take more of our power back. Keep listening because the next one is about boundaries, and that is 100% related to our triggers and healing. If something in this episode felt a little too familiar, don't brush past that. That's where the work starts. Healing isn't about having all the answers. It's about being willing to look at what's real. If you're in that space, stay with me. Follow, share, or come back when you're ready. This is Addictive Personalities.